Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. We are once again going to be exploring some creepy and allegedly true stories from military personnel. This is one of my favorite series I've began doing this year. I really enjoy stories from the Army, the Navy, the military, whatever it may be. And I think you guys might enjoy them too. It seems like that anyway. If you have a story that you'd like to share in a future video, whether it be a military story or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and let's get into these creepy stories from military personnel. Hello, I recently submitted a story to you. It was one of the military stories in the 5th part of the series. To keep myself unknown from the community, I won't say my name. Anyway, I'm writing again because of a story my friend Lucas shared with me after I shared mine with him. Keep in mind, Lucas did not believe in ghosts in the least bit, never has been to church or anything like that. He is a corrections officer for a small community jail in northern Michigan. To give you some context, before he got there, a man killed himself in one of the cells by hanging. He told me that apparently no one came to collect the body since he was older, maybe mid-60s, never married and had no kids. Being that was the situation, he was kept in the morgue in the jail for a long time. Well, my friend was on duty one night and a door randomly opens. Keep in mind, all the doors are automatic, so there is no way it could have opened on its own. He called up to his other officer to see if he opened it. The other officer, whose name was Tony, sounded confused since he was nowhere near the door or operating station. Then, all of a sudden, Tony sounded scared and called Lucas up to the security room, which is upstairs behind an automatic door. Lucas starts to walk over to him, first closes that opened one, and then goes to the stairwell. He uses his key to open it, but it isn't working. He tries again and it isn't working. Tony then radios down to Lucas to go see what the females are up to. Lucas makes his way over to the female bay, where he sees a bunch of females sitting around a table. He approaches the table and freaks out. He demands all the females to go to bed right away. Once they are all in their cells, he walks back over to the tables. The prisoners made a Ouija board out of a cereal box. Lucas collected it and threw it away. I walked to the security room and finally got to the door and got it to unlock. While Lucas was trying to open the door the first time, Tony saw 2 orbs of light on the screen, both of which were shaken violently. One was in the female's bay, and the other was in the cell where the man killed himself. The one from the cell darted into the female bay right next to the other and became one orb, then vanished. I'm not one to believe in ghosts and such, but this kind of shocked me, especially coming from this friend. So my story starts when I was in the United States Army stationed at Fort Drum, New York. I lived on base in a garden-style apartment. Now, I had given someone I knew a spare key to get in if I was away. There had been someone who lived in the upstairs apartment and the 2 beside me. One night, I heard the sound of a rocking chair. I didn't think anything of it until it wouldn't stop, so I, being my short-tempered self, banged on the ceiling with a broom, and I went back to sleep. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps in my front room. I thought maybe it was just the neighbor upstairs. Hearing the noise again, I got out of bed to see if it was a person I knew with my spare keys. Nope, nothing, and no one was out there. I went to turn off my bathroom light and went back to my bedroom. I lay back down and then I felt what feels like a man standing over me, so I again thought it was a friend of mine. No one was in my room with me, it was just myself. I don't know what it was, and I don't know what all that was about, but every hair on my body stood up and I got the chills. I then pulled the cover back over my head. Then I felt it again. This time there was a very distinct growling in my ear, almost like a large dog or even a wolf-type growl. It freaked me out. I jumped up, slammed my bedroom door, and locked it. Luckily it was a Friday and I didn't have to go to work the next day. Freaky, right? To this day, however, I am a skeptic, even though it wasn't the first time I've had an experience with something that I guess you could call supernatural. A year ago, I met a very interesting man who eventually became a good friend to me. I'll call him Chris to protect his identity. We both have a military background, so naturally we spoke about some of our exploits in those past lives. He had an unexpectedly haunting story to tell, and when I later got this channel up and running, I asked if I could share it with you. So here we go. This took place on an undisclosed military base located in the damp jungles of a remote island. Chris says he remembers the wilderness being unnervingly quiet for at least a week leading up to the incident. The personnel stationed there chalked the silence up to a change in season or something. There had been reports of bizarre sightings, fast-moving animals no one could explain. Anyone who mentioned them was typically shut down with ridicule from fellow soldiers. The sightings were notably inconsistent with one another. Some saw large eyes, others saw small ones. Some heard a big thing trudging boisterously through the woods. Others heard the sounds of something small and light sneaking around in the brush. No one had seen anything worth defending in an inevitable argument though, let alone losing their reputation over. Chris heard every report due to the fact that he was the desk sergeant at the time. Anyone who saw or heard something off, which could potentially impact the security of the base, would typically come to him to have it notated in the log. He never took the more fantastical reports seriously enough to actually write them down, unbeknownst to the concerned soldiers who came to him. Some of them came just to talk about what had happened, off the record, anyway, which would typically end up with them just trading ghost stories. On the night in question, Chris and his team were on the far side of the island, an area which was completely uninhabited, where no human presence could be found for hundreds of miles in every direction. For that reason, the military chose that location for storing their weapons and explosives. Chris and a partner, who I'll call Barry, were conducting the nightly checks on the magazine storage areas, which lay several miles deep into the uninhabited zone. The jungle was still weirdly quiet, but it was good for them. It's their mission to detect any form of foreign intelligence or operatives tampering with US equipment or the occasional refugee group that was washing ashore. They were on a road that rested in the valley of two mountains, bordered by gigantic hills, thick and rocky with tall grass. As they drove along slowly with their Humvee windows down, they heard a heavy thud coming from the woods. A totally unexpected, unnatural sound emanated clearly from the tangled growth. The first thud drew their attention but was quickly followed by other noises. Barry shut off the headlights and shut off the engine so they could sneak up on whoever or whatever was out there. They knew anyone attempting to navigate the dense vegetation would have to do so carefully, taking time to avoid injury. But, surprisingly, they could hear fast-paced walking, rustling through the tall grass. After a few moments, the sound began to move parallel to the road. They restarted the vehicle and started to pursue the noise. The walking continued for a while as they followed it, with only their running lights on, before suddenly stopping. They at first thought they'd lost track of whatever it was, so they turned the headlights back on, assuming it was a deer or something, and continued a distance down the road. As Barry proceeded to turn the high beams on, both men noticed something in the distance, approximately 30 yards ahead, a humanoid creature jumping into the road and then into the brush on the other side. It was gray, over 2 meters tall with a small oval head. Its movements were too swift for its size. The best way he could describe its leaping motion was like that of an impossibly nimble frog. Seeing the creature instantly gave Chris the feeling of being punched in the stomach. His heart sank so rapidly and my adrenaline kicked in so fast that he began to feel nauseous on the verge of vomiting. He laments the fact that neither of them had the will to chase after the creature, but that the feeling of being at such a disadvantage was absolutely petrifying. The idea that they were stalking it raised the question, were they hunting or being hunted themselves? Whatever it was, the monster definitely had the tactical advantages of position and mobility. Chris and Barry turned their truck around and sped off into the night. The woods remained silent for at least another week, returning to the normal droning sounds of the local wildlife. During our basic training, there was a Thai man. He was always odd, asking us about the Bible all the time. Then one of our fellow soldiers killed himself. Everything started going wrong all of a sudden after that. Shortly after, another person jumped out a window, and another tried to jump but got stopped by me. This was at an Army Foundation college, Horrogate. Then, each night, the guy I saved would have the wall with the pipe and rope attached to it. He would just try to hang there and speak Latin. When he would turn around and look at us, his eyes were completely turned to the back of his head. He would be just saying, "La petite mort," over and over again. He killed himself for real. Then all the room got cold. It was like 2 a.m. Papers were flying everywhere. I stopped experiencing this stuff once I passed my training and got out of there. I still wonder 4 years later if it's haunted or what the heck happened. It's so weird to know that so many people killed themselves in a short span there. I wonder if it had anything to do with that Thai man who would ask us all those odd questions. As an introduction, I'm a Marine who is currently a truck driver for the United States in my late 20s. I believe in the paranormal and higher powers that be and all that, but have very little first-hand experience. The following are 2 times in which the unexplained either helped me out or possibly saved me from any number of scenarios. In January of 2014, that frozen January, a fellow Marine and I were headed from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to Indiana for my upcoming wedding. M, as I will call him, and I had a pretty rough trip. To spare some space, the short version is, M has never seen snow, and because of this we almost crashed only an hour outside of base. M, paying for the gas on the trip, lost his wallet. This is a factor later. We nearly rear-ended a 53-foot trailer that was just sitting in the middle of a frozen minor state highway. Anyway, because M had lost his wallet, by the time we reached Indianapolis we were in desperate need of gas, and it was negative 17 degrees out, not counting wind chill. Growing up around quote old school truckers, I was hoping I could make it to a truck stop and just get enough money for gas to get us to our destination. I-65 being shut down, we had to take some alternative routes and wound up on a large stark stretch of highway and somehow came across a truck stop. Nothing noteworthy, but hey, lights were on and there was even a truck parked. I will always remember this truck. It was a solid black classic square-nosed Peterbilt, and those huge barrel stacks all chromed out, and the trailer was all matching, but no company markers. Not totally odd, but not the norm either. I went inside, and luckily the driver was having a cup of coffee. M was passed out in the car at this point, so no luck supporting this. Dang. I politely asked if I could bother him for a moment, trying my best not to sound like those scam artist panhandlers. He said it was fine and asked if I wanted a cup of coffee. I really did actually need a cup of coffee, and have needed it for the past 2 hours, and would need it for the next 2. So, I explained to this guy our situation, and told him since 65 was shut down, I could bring the money back to him before we would be able to leave. Seeing as I had an emergency bank account at home and didn't have a card to it, so I could burn up the money. I was still an immature young 20s Marine with an ego at the time. He said sure, gave me some cash, and ordered 2 to-go cups of coffee for me and M. Later that morning I came back to pay this man and thank him again. But the truck stop was boarded up like it hadn't been in use for years. There was no truck, not even tracks in the snow. The only tracks were from our car where I had parked earlier that morning, and the now present cop car. I asked this officer about the place, and this was his retort. Let me guess. The trucker had a big black solid truck, right? Yes, sir. And it was about 3 a.m.? Thinking I replied with another yes. Kiddo, you met your guardian angel. He only helps those who really need it and have good intentions. We call him the Ghost of 3. Pretty bewildered, I asked why the Ghost of 3. Because it's always at 3 a.m. This is Route 3, and the help is always in some sort of 3. How much did he give you? The officer nodded to the money in my hand. 30. The second, I have been a trucker for about a year now, and should note that I have a heavy influence of Cherokee and Navajo on my side. That'll make sense in a moment. I was traveling down I-44 in Missouri, just before Big Cabin, a Native American tourist attraction. There are all kinds of stories about Indian graves and ghost tales and voices around that area. Just nothing I've never gotten to experience. So, I had plenty of time to spare for the day, so I was cruising right along listening to some stories from a few channels that I like, when I noticed a car on the shoulder with a woman gesturing like she needed help. You know, both arms waving as a vehicle approaches. Now, I have CB in my truck. For those who don't know, it's an older form of radio communication that was created for similar intent as cell phones for anybody traveling in a vehicle. I had actually forgotten to turn mine back on when I started my day. Well, as I started to slow my truck, I hear a clear voice come across my CB and say, "Don't stop, the driver." Oblivious to my CB not being on, I didn't think much about it, but decided to pull over in front of the car, not behind it. Then I heard it again, but more aggressive. "Don't stop, keep driving." As I passed the car, I saw my reason to hit the accelerator and got out of dodge. In front of the car, a man was crouched down near the passenger side with a gun, and was glaring as I passed and kept driving. Guardian angels, ghost, unexplained, whatever you call it, thank any form of higher power for the trucker at 3 a.m. and the voice that called over my CB, because that was definitely weird. Now this story is in a few different timelines, but revolves around the same person. This is not my story, but my grandfather's. I myself have my own stories to tell, but this is one that I've always been fascinated with, because it's one that makes me feel happy my grandfather is protected by, well, other things in this world. Anyway, on with the story. My grandfather was in his 20s, I believe, when he went into the Gulf War, back when he was in the Marine Corps. He had made a lot of friends during that time and also made some horrible memories. He sometimes wakes up to and tells me now that one of his best friends, who joined the military around the same time as him, was the closest brother he had ever had. My grandfather was the only boy out of 6 sisters in the family, so those 2 were super close. They did everything together. They were in the same squad together. Their unit names were the Flying Tigers. or flight line or something like that. I can't remember that exact detail. My grandfather worked on Black Hawks and all the helicopters in his unit, so he knows his in and outs about his metal birds. But anyways, after the war, my grandfather moved him and his family to Hawaii. I forget which island, and don't want to make this story longer than it is, so anyway, him and his family did everything on that island. My mother tells me that they had their own boat, beachfront house, and pretty amazing stuff. I only saw some pictures once. My grandfather's best friend owned a helicopter ride tour business on the island, and they frequently roamed them all around on the weekends for fun things to do. My grandfather trusted his friend on how to fly a bird, so he would let his kids go on insanely crazy far rides. But one day, as my mom and my uncle were wanting to go for a ride one time, but my grandfather had a weird feeling that it was not a good idea to go. After many times of begging him to go with us for a ride, my grandfather had had enough and grounded them for getting on his nerves. He said he didn't want them on the bird, and that was that. He didn't feel comfortable for some reason. Of course, my mom and uncle were mad and went to their rooms. About 10 minutes later, his friend called him asking if he was coming for a ride today, but my grandfather told him that he wasn't feeling good today and just wanted to relax, and asked him if he wanted to come over for a barbecue later that day. They both agreed on the barbecue, but his friend had to take some other friends on a flight that day to mess around, so he'll be over later. My grandfather, still not feeling comfortable with the flying, just blew the feeling off and told him he'll see him later on that night. Well, some time had passed, and my grandfather, being a heavy smoker at the time, was outside on his front lawn till he heard many fire trucks and ambulances driving around. His gut feeling was starting to act up, and not a minute sooner my grandfather got a call, and my grandmother and his wife at the time came running outside handing him the phone. Another friend on the other line said that he needed to come down there, and there has been an accident with his friend. Let's call his friend Roger from now on. Well, anyways, he raced down to where he was told to go, and as he got to the site, he said that he felt an intense feeling of dread wash over him as he saw Roger's bird was in many different pieces and in flames in a field surrounded by fire trucks. Now him being him jumped into the attack and helped put out the fire, and after the damage and everything was cleared, he was able to make out 4 burnt, mangled bodies in the field, one of them being Roger. Now at that moment my grandfather didn't feel sad or anything when he saw his body. He was more confused than anything. He just spoke with him on the phone saying he was going to have a barbecue later, but now he's looking at him, his body being in many different pieces and burnt up. He said he could still hear Roger's voice speaking to him right at that spot as he was standing, talking about the barbecue. So after that moment, he stood at the site till all of the fellow Marines were identified and tagged and carried away. Him hearing Roger's family in tears, and him strangely being calm, just watching everything. He went home and told his family everything, and then he broke down. He said that he couldn't see him anymore or feel his presence around him, so he started crying non-stop. Later that night, after everything calmed down, he said that my grandpa was still sitting in the living room getting wasted after the death of his only brother. He heard his voice calling his name. He said he heard it as clear as day. "Tony," in Roger's high voice, like he was saying what's up to him. My grandfather said that he felt instantly calm again, and had no sad emotions or anything, like nothing even happened. Now, I know this story is feeling like it's going on forever, but this does end soon. Fast forward to now. About 10 years later, this was around the time I was maybe 4 years old, and my grandfather was far retired and divorced, living in Okinawa, Japan, working as a car mechanic. My grandfather was working alone one day in his shop, working on a car he had suspended in the air on those huge car lifter things and working under it. My grandfather put lots of emphasis on how quiet it was. He heard the little bell on the door, sounding like someone came into the shop, and he heard a male's voice yell up from the front, "Yo, Tony!" like someone was trying to get his attention. My grandfather yelled back while still being under the car, "Hey, I'm back here." No answer. So he left his tools and went to the front and saw that nobody was there. It was just him. Out of nowhere, he heard a lot of crashing and a thud in the back room. Him being startled, he went back and saw that the entire car that was in the air had fell right where he was standing just moments before. I guess the gears busted and dropped the car, almost killing my grandfather. I don't know if those two stories are connected, but I'd like to think that my grandfather, brother-like best friend, saved him that day. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true military stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day on everything natural and supernatural. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much every other major podcast platform out there. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the swamp. The military stories are a lot of fun to tell, because you never know what you're going to get from the people out there on the front lines. If you have a story you'd like to share, definitely send it in. I want to keep this series going. If you made it all the way to the end, today's code word is flashing lightning bolt. Comment that down below to let me know that you made it all the way to the end, and to confuse anybody who didn't. Thank you guys once again, and I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.